This is Graziella from the Daily Dose, and it's my pleasure today to have with me in my kitchen Kemoy Campbell, who's sitting in the midst of Florida. It's 8 a.m. for him, and I'm sitting here in my nice evening of 11 p.m. The beauty of having a team that's as diverse as ours is having people who are just like Kemoy. He's got to be one of my favorite people. And one of the reasons is he comes from my favorite place in the world, the Caribbean. And the second is because he has such a real, amazing, and really vital story as a young athlete. When I met Kemoy, it was around 4 to 5 years ago, and we were doing a national program with Jamaica around sport and sports mental health called Elevate the Game, around the mental muscle of sport. And Kemoy happened to be one of our panelists. He was exciting and very vital, and I found him so engaging. So much so, he ended up working with us at the Optimisation Hub, and he's one of our very valued trainers. So I want to have a little bit of a warmth and a warm round of applause in my heart for having Kemoy in the room today and to have him with us sharing some of his wisdom. Hey, Kemoy, so nice to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here. How are you
So
doing today?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. So I was having a
Yeah.
chat with you before we came into the session, and this is the kind of the important part is we started talking about youth and sport, and we had this conversation about the difference, what it's like now for young people and what it was like before. What have you noticed? We've been doing some really great work with a number of different teams that you've been involved with over the years. And if I asked you to reflect on both what young people gain from the programs and skills, and we joke about it. Sometimes we say, look, for the price of a few McDonald's dinners, you've got this amazing program that's so sticky and so great. It lasts you a lifetime and gives you tools that you wished you had, when you were going through. But we also talk about and reflect that there is a difference between young athletes 15 years ago and young athletes today. What do you see?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. Because when I was an athlete, I had to deal with less people. There wasn't social media around where in those days you were accessible to everyone. And so I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. Nowadays, whenever you have youths in programs, what ends up happening is if someone's really good, you have tons of people coming after that person, whether it's schools, whether it's colleges, whether it's sponsors, it doesn't really matter. So what ends up happening is if these youths they're really young, if they don't know how to handle dealing with these people, or you could say stakeholders, what ends up happening is they're overwhelmed by this and they might not know how to handle it, which with the program, from what I learned from being in OHUB, which is important, we teach them how to manage these stakeholders. And at the end of the day, they learn who's important, um, how they handle these important people. They learn how to set goals, how to separate goals depending on who they're dealing with, which I think is very good for youths now because they have more exposure than even I did whenever I was competing.
You've been at the Olympics, several times, and you've also had a medical event around being an athlete. And we often talk about listening to your body. Athletes are taught to listen to their bodies, but we also see a lot of ignoring of that and that push. And the other thing we have a chat about every now and then is this fear of that's overriding fear for young people in sport, where they do become quite silent, and the importance of what you experienced and what that difference means for you today.
Yes, I'm very passionate about this topic that you just brought up. And the reason why is when my incident happened, I was afraid because I was on a contract. I was afraid to tell my stakeholder that, hey, listen, I'm having chest pain. Whenever I'm running, my heart feels like it's going to explode. And that prevented me, just because of my contract, that prevented me from being more forthwith with the people who would have probably helped me, knowing that I'm having chest pain. With athletes, I try to teach athletes now that whenever you're having some kind of crisis, it's important like you stand up for yourself. It's at the end of the day, you have one body. You have to make sure you're taking care of that one body. And it's if you don't take care of that body, and you're not vocal about how you're feeling at that moment, nobody else is gonna know. Because as a coach, when I'm coaching my athlete, I can't look at them and tell if they're feeling something internally. You have to come to me as an athlete and say, hey, I'm feeling some chest pain. I'm not feeling well today. I don't think I can do it. Then and there, I can ask you certain questions which are important to kind of tell me what's going on with you, and I can determine whether or not we can continue training or we can discontinue training. It's important, and I've learned from like OHUB, the program, how to communicate better with athletes, because I've learned like once I was I started OHUB, I didn't really know how to communicate with the parents as well. And majority of the time when I'm working with young athletes, I'm dealing with the parents. And it was very difficult for me because I'm there to coach the athlete to be the best athlete they can. However, you're also coaching a parent. And I didn't realize that at first. And when I started, I would just coach an athlete, but now you have to coach a parent to kind of tell them, like, hey, listen, the athlete's going through this. You need to step back for a little bit. Like, I can handle it. If there's something really important that I need to get across to you, I will. We both can't be coaching the athlete at the same time. And that was kind of difficult for me, but I learned tools that helped me to to help get things across simpler without stepping on anybody's toes.
That's just, music to my ears because I have that repeatedly from so many coaches who say to me, gosh, can do an MBA, can sit down and, do advanced leadership, but just doing a very straightforward program with us has given them the tools to not only be able to communicate with stakeholders that way, but to also teach resilience to young athletes. So it's one thing for a young athlete to go through a program with their peers with us, but then, coaches become an extension of an athlete's family. And sometimes they supersede the family themselves. So, there is a competition at times if you've got an overzealous parent, but quite often, that young person will look up to the coach and spend more time with their coach than they do their family. So that's where a lot of critical pathway learning does start to happen for the mental muscle. So mental skills, that direction. And I'm honestly just absolutely amazed at how often I hear exactly what you're saying. Um, I wonder though, Kemoy, if we think about, the passion that we have for youth and we think about the things that you do, you are so passionate, you are so dedicated. How do you keep yourself focused on that passion and dedication when there can be obstacles and barriers that you come up against within sport, or for that young person, or the young person themselves has barriers? How do you keep your dedication up, and how do you help them remove barriers?
So I think, when I have to speak from personal experience, I had a phenomenal coach when I was growing up. He did a lot for me, not only on the track, off the track, but like just teaching me how to be a grown up when I was in grown up situations. He taught that to me, and it was very important to me because with young athletes now, as I said, they have a lot more to deal with. They have a lot more to deal with. So kind of understanding where they're coming from, who they're around, what they do, helps you to help them in a simple way. And the way I stay motivated doing that is I love seeing people achieve goals that they set. I'm a huge advocate of setting goals. When I was an athlete, I used goals. I started with short-term goals, then I used long-term goals, and every single athlete that I've had, I've started by telling them, set a short-term goal. Where do you see yourself in a week? Where do you see yourself in 2 weeks? Where do you see yourself in 3 weeks? And those goals eventually takes you to a place where it just meld into a long-term goal, and all of a sudden you realize your performance is improving each week. And even if it's not improving each week, you know exactly where the goal is and how to get to that goal. And whenever I see someone achieve those short-term goals that they set out to, realistic short-term goals that they set out to achieve, I'm happy. That motivates me as a coach. And that's how I keep my pride in my athletes. That's how I keep pushing myself to be a better coach. And I've seen it's worked for me. It's worked for many athletes that I've had. And I think I'll just continue using that for many other future athletes that I will have.
I think it's inspiring to listen to you. And I guess, one of the things I'll say, there are some things I regularly hear you say when you're in the room, with coaches, whether it's groups of 40 coaches at a time when you're working with them. And then I hear even more passionate and dedicated work with young people. You've got a real capacity and capability to work with youth. And I know in our youth program, they go back to the platform, but in the rooms and even in that platform, they're listening to you. And one of the things that you're saying is, my advice to you, and you can take it or leave it, you can be there, but the most important thing that you can do today is go out and take this on and try it and work with it, because young athletes have a different environment, but they still have that same core driver that you were talking about. So what's your best advice for young athletes? What's your best advice for them, knowing the environment they work in now, which is so immediate and so right now? And I think you and I spoke again before the session about how many different points of feedback they were, getting their information from, which can be really overstimulating. What's your advice for keeping them on the straight and narrow, managing those stakeholders when, it's pretty scary, but also how they manage themselves to be both injury free and perform at their best?
I think the best advice I would give a young person is stay focused and listen to your body, and also keep people around you who share the same goals with you. I'm giving this advice based on experience, because people around you who doesn't have the same goals tend to take you off the path that you're on. And if, for example, you have your teammates, if they want to win a game, obviously you're going to be working just as hard, and they're going to be working just as hard to make sure they win that game. And if that's the goal that you have set for that day, then and that's a goal you strive towards together. And I think just staying focused is a huge part of it, because there are lots of distractions out there, as you just mentioned. Lots of people contacting you, like whether you're doing well, lots of people want to tell you congrats, lots of people want to just be a part of your circle. But some of those people doesn't necessarily want the same thing that you want, which is to become a professional athlete, which is because to get a contract. Most of those people just want to be in that circle just because you're winning at that moment. But if you have a long-term goal to get a contract, you know what you need. So you have to surround yourself with people who their long-term goal is similar. And I think that's a huge asset when it comes to young athletes. Just being able to stay focused, know who is for them and who is not, and just just creating long-term goals and sticking to it.
I love that. It's sticking to it, keeping the promise, right? So keeping the promise,
Yes.
And if you don't, Coach Pat Washington says it, if the mind can conceive, then the body is going to work with that. Then you're going to be able to believe. So
Yep.
anything you believe and conceive in is going to happen. I guess, Kemoy, just to finish up there's a burning question for me. And that is, if you could leave behind a droplet of wisdom that you think you didn't have before you trained and worked on that mental muscle program for every single athlete, what would it be? What is it that they can take away from today that's just going to put them in good stead for everything they do?
Learn where you are and where you're going.
Nice.
Learn where you are, where you're going. I think knowing where you are at the moment will teach you how to handle every single obstacle that's in your way
Yeah.
to get to where you're going.
Profound words. Thank you, Kemoy Campbell. And we will meet again.
Thank you.